She told me to come. "We'll pick you up at the airport," she said. I believed her. I'd packed the night before, not just clothes, but jars of blackberry jam, a baby quilt I stitched by hand, soft sweaters that still held the smell of cedar from my drawers. I flew out with sore knees and hopeful eyes, thinking I was needed. Grandmothers always are, aren't they? The plane landed at 10:47 a.m. I switched on my phone as soon as we touched down. No new messages, but I wasn't worried. Some people don't think to text when they're driving. I waited in the arrivals hall, suitcase upright, both hands resting on the handle. The tag read A. Merritt. I hadn't used it since Harold's funeral. I found a bench by the windows. The sun hit my lap, warm through the glass. I sat there like luggage waiting to be claimed. An hour passed, then another. People came and went. Some cried, some laughed. A man next to me handed roses to a woman with curlers still in her hair. Across the way, a family held up a sign that said, "Welcome home, soldier." I kept looking up each time the doors opened. My eyes got dry. At 12:53 p.m., my phone buzzed. Finally, I unlocked the screen with stiff fingers. "Actually, we're too tired. Maybe next time." That was it. No punctuation, no apology, just a casual dismissal, like canceling a dentist appointment. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I read them again, slowly this time, as if they'd mean something different if I gave them another chance. They didn't. No, sorry. No, maybe take a cab. No concern for whether I had eaten or needed help. My daughter had asked me to come help with the baby. I had asked for nothing. And now I was an inconvenience, a task deferred. Maybe next time. I stood up. My knees protested. The handle of the suitcase left a red line across my palm. I walked past the information desk, past the shuttle signs, past the posters of smiling families on vacation. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, I was, but because I knew tears wouldn't fix anything. Not this late in life. Outside, the air was thin and cold. A long line of taxis waited by the curb like yellow dominoes. I approached one, opened the door, and told the driver, "Take me somewhere quiet, not too expensive." He looked at me through the rearview mirror. "You okay, ma'am?" I nodded. Just tired. The hotel was a 3-story building with a flickering vacancy sign. The kind of place for passing through types. I didn't mind. It was clean, quiet, and the clerk had kind eyes. I paid for 2 nights. When he asked if I needed help with bags, I shook my head. Then I did one last thing. I pulled the tote bag out of my suitcase. The one full of things for the baby. The little duck booties, the pacifiers, the wrapped gifts with handwritten tags. I walked back to the front desk and placed it gently on the counter. "My daughter might come by. If she does, give this to her. No name needed. She'll know." The clerk hesitated. "Should I write down your room?" "No," I said. "Don't mention me." He nodded. I left the bag there and walked away. I didn't look back. Up in the room, I sat on the bed without removing my coat. Outside the window, I could see a gas station and a bare tree swaying in the wind. I watched it for a long time. That night, I ate from the vending machine. Pretzels, a cup of tea. I wrote nothing. I texted no one. I turned off my phone. They knew I was here. They chose not to come. That was enough. The room was small but neat. Pale blue walls, a single armchair, a square window with stiff beige curtains. I didn't unpack. I didn't hang anything. I just placed my coat over the chair and sat still for a long while. The silence wasn't kind. It made space for old echoes. I kept thinking about that text. 4 words. Actually, we're too tired. I remembered her voice when she was little, how it used to lilt when she said mama, like it still tasted sweet. Somewhere between then and now, I'd become someone easy to postpone. At 8 a.m., I went downstairs. The hotel offered continental breakfast, lukewarm coffee, tiny muffins in plastic wrap, and a bowl of oranges. I peeled one slowly, letting the citrus cling to my fingers. Across from me sat a woman with silver hair and bright lipstick, maybe 10 years older than me. She was reading a local paper and wearing earrings shaped like cats. I liked her instantly. She looked up, caught me watching, and smiled. "First morning here?" "Yes," I said. "Passing through?" "No," I said, and then paused. "Just resting." She nodded, like that made perfect sense. Sometimes that's the only thing worth doing. We didn't say anything else, but for some reason, her presence steadied me. When I returned to my room, the front desk clerk called. "Just to let you know, ma'am, no one came by for the bag. Should I hold on to it another day?" I told him yes, thank you, and hung up. I wasn't surprised. She wasn't going to come. She had my number. She had the name of the hotel. But it wasn't about effort. It was about choice. I'd always made it too easy for her, always drove the extra miles, always paid the airfare, always waited at the gate. This time, I wouldn't chase. I wouldn't explain. I wouldn't beg to be included. Around noon, I walked out into the cold. The sidewalk was slick with last night's frost. I passed a thrift store, a post office, a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and warm butter. I went inside the bakery and bought a single roll. The woman behind the counter asked, "Warming it up?" I nodded. The warmth was the point. At the little table by the window, I watched the people. A boy with a too-big backpack, a woman in scrubs, an older man balancing 2 coffees on a tray. I felt invisible, but not in the way I used to. Not erased, not ignored. Just out of frame. Watching. Measuring the weather. I used to think being a mother meant never sitting down, always being ready, always holding something, a hand, a bottle, a burden. But sitting there, with my paper bag and my soft roll, I realized I was tired of holding things that no one reached for. Back at the hotel, the clerk gave me a polite nod. No updates. No visitors. Upstairs, I changed into soft clothes, not the ones I'd packed for the visit. Not the ones that said, "I'm ready to help with the baby." I curled up in the armchair with a blanket, turned on the lamp, and opened the small book I'd packed as an afterthought. A novel I'd started 3 times but never finished. I read until my eyes blurred. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rehearse conversations. I didn't imagine scenarios where she suddenly understood. Instead, I let the day settle. By nightfall, I felt something quiet bloom inside me. Not peace exactly, but clarity. They weren't coming, and that wasn't the worst thing in the world. She was 6 when I first saw her asleep in the laundry basket. I'd been folding towels, the kind with blue edges that always bled in hot water. She crawled in among them like a kitten, thumb in mouth, curls stuck to her cheek. I didn't wake her. I just watched. Back then, I thought love meant saying yes. Every request, every extra scoop of ice cream, every midnight story reread twice. I thought that's what mothers did. Filled the spaces, caught the falls, stayed awake when everyone else slept. That habit, the saying yes, it stretched through years. I said yes when she moved home at 19 with a boyfriend who smelled of beer and made jokes I didn't like. I said yes when she needed a loan to finish school, then another to get by until her first job started. I said yes when she asked me to watch her dog just for the weekend that became 7 months. Somewhere in there, saying yes stopped sounding like love and started sounding like apology. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. I'm sorry I raised you alone. I'm sorry the world felt cold sometimes. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more. I'm sorry for asking anything in return. Now, at 72, I was starting to wonder what would have happened if I had said no. That afternoon, I opened my notebook. Not a journal. I never kept one. Too afraid it would be read, misread, turned against me. Just a lined notebook I bought from the hotel lobby for $2. I wrote one sentence at the top. What I would have said if I'd thought I had the right. Then I began. I am not your backup plan. I am not a collapsible chair, easy to store and unfold when convenient. I am not an errand or a favor or a footnote in your life. I am the woman who held your fevered head and listened to your nonsense stories about unicorns and buried treasure. I am the one who skipped meals so you could have new shoes. I am the one who stayed. I didn't stop for punctuation. I didn't worry about sounding calm. I wrote until my fingers ached. Then I put the notebook in the drawer and closed it gently. Not to hide it, just to keep it from fraying. The day was fading when I heard a knock on the wall. Not my door, just the room next door. Probably the cat earrings lady, dropping something. I imagined her in pink slippers, humming to herself, reading romance novels with dog-eared corners. It made me smile. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. Outside, headlights slid past like fish in a dark stream. I thought of the baby I never got to meet. What was his name again? They'd told me once. Theo, maybe. Or Felix. Strange how fast a name can fade when no one says it to you. I didn't feel bitter. Not that night. Just used up. Like a candle that had burned long past the wick. I brushed my hair, made tea with a paper-wrapped bag, and sat cross-legged on the bed like I used to do when I was younger. Like I had more time. She hadn't called. Not even a follow-up. No check-in. No, "Are you okay, Mom?" Just silence. The kind that doesn't echo. The kind that builds a wall. And for once, I wasn't reaching over it. The letter wasn't for sending. It wasn't for her. It was for me. I read it again in the morning light, this time without anger. The words were mine, and they had weight. Not bitterness. I wouldn't give her that. But truth. A truth I'd buried for decades under casseroles, car rides, last-minute babysitting, and soft-voiced reassurances that, "It's fine, honey, of course I'll come." It wasn't fine. Not then. And certainly not now. I tore out the page. Not violently. Just enough to feel it separate. Then I folded it, once, twice, and tucked it under the ceramic tray that held the hotel's instant coffee packets. Let it rest there like a pressed flower, a relic of a voice too long ignored. Breakfast was the same as the day before. Dry muffins, watery orange juice, coffee that tasted like cardboard. But I was hungry, and hunger felt honest. I ate slowly, watching the other guests. The woman with the cat earrings was gone, maybe checked out, maybe just sleeping in. I didn't miss her, but I noticed her absence. At the front desk, the young man with the clipboard glanced up. "Still no pickup," he said, nodding toward the closet behind him where the bag sat untouched. "Want me to hold it another day?" I shook my head. "No. I'd like to donate it." He blinked. "You sure? It looked like baby stuff." "Yes," I said. It was. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said he'd take care of it. I thanked him and walked out into the morning air. The wind had a bite, but it cleared my head. I passed the bakery again, but didn't go in. This time I kept walking, past a bookstore with dusty windows, a church with a cracked bell, and finally a squat little brick building with a faded sign. Volunteer Resource Center, walk-ins. Welcome. I don't know why I went in. Maybe I was just tired of sitting. Maybe I needed to feel useful. Maybe I wanted to remember what it felt like to offer something and have it received with open hands. Inside, a woman with gray roots and a lemon-yellow scarf looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" "I'm not from here," I said. "But I've got time. I've got 2 good hands and most of my brain still intact." Thought maybe someone could use me. She smiled, not kindly, but seriously, like I'd said something worth hearing. "What do you like to do?" "I cook, I sew, I read out loud pretty well. I raised a daughter. I was a secretary for 30 years, and I know how to sit beside someone in silence, if that's what they need." Her smile deepened. "You'd be surprised how few people know how to do that last one." She handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out. We'll find a place for you." I sat on a plastic chair with a wobbly leg and began to write. Name, age, previous experience. I checked boxes I hadn't looked at in years: elder care, meal delivery, literacy programs. At the bottom, it asked for an emergency contact. I paused, then I wrote. None needed. When I handed it back, she didn't flinch, just said, "We'll call you." As I stepped outside again, the wind lifted the ends of my scarf. I adjusted it, zipped my coat, and kept walking. That night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for it to buzz. I was done waiting. The phone buzzed once, then stopped. I didn't rush to check it. It was early evening, the kind of dusky light that makes everything feel softer, quieter. I'd just returned from a walk, 3 blocks down, 2 across, enough to get the blood moving without testing my knees. The air had the sharpness of approaching winter, and I liked it. It made me feel awake. Inside the room, the radiator hummed. I made tea, strong and dark. I poured it into the white hotel mug with the chip on the rim. Familiar now. Everything was becoming familiar. The creak of the floorboard near the bed, the slightly uneven lamp, even the loose thread on the curtain that I still hadn't bothered to fix. I finally picked up the phone. It was her. A single message. "Everything okay?" 3 words. No punctuation. I read them twice, maybe more. I didn't answer, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't want to perform anymore. I didn't want to soothe. Not this time. Instead, I sat down with my tea and let the silence settle again. Later that night, I heard a knock at the door next to mine. Then a muffled voice. The cat earrings woman was back. I opened my door slightly, just to peek. She was standing there with a takeout bag in one hand and a small dog on a leash in the other. "Evening," she said, noticing me. "You're the quiet one." I smiled. "Trying something new." "Good for you," she said. "Most people talk too much and say nothing." I liked her more with every sentence. "You staying long?" I asked. She shrugged. "No plans. I don't do schedules anymore. Just places that feel bearable." I nodded. "That's a good rule." She tilted her head. "You want half a sandwich?" "It's turkey. Too much for one person." I hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. "I won't say no." We sat in the little lounge downstairs. Vinyl chairs, an old vending machine, a television with the sound turned off. The sandwich was good. The silence between bites was better. "I used to live with my daughter," she said after a while. "Thought we'd take care of each other. Turns out I was the only one keeping score." I looked at her, steady and open. She said I was too opinionated, she continued. Told me I didn't fit her lifestyle, so I left. Took my pension and bought a camper van. Haven't looked back. That's brave, I said. She shook her head. No, honey. That's survival. I thought about the bag still sitting behind the hotel desk, the one she hadn't come for. The baby things that would now go to strangers. Maybe strangers who'd be grateful. It hurts, though, I said. Even when you know it's the right thing. She didn't argue, just nodded. We sat like that. Two older women with aching joints and tired hearts, sharing a sandwich and the simple fact of being seen. Before going back upstairs, she looked at me and said, "Sometimes they don't come around. Not ever. You've got to be okay with that." I was learning to be. The next morning, the hotel clerk handed me a folded receipt. "Donation picked up," he said. "Signed by a woman named Marta. From the shelter. She said thank you." I nodded, pressing the paper between my fingers. The bag was gone. The duck booties, the jar of jam, the card I wrote with for my grandson in careful print. All of it had found a new place. A better one, I hoped. There was a quiet in me now. Not peace, but something like it. A steadiness. I sat by the window with my tea, the same chair, the same chipped mug. The sky was the color of dishwater. A few cars passed. Across the lot, a young man helped an older woman out of a van, gently holding her elbow. She smiled at him with her whole face. I hadn't smiled like that in a while. The phone lay face down on the nightstand. I hadn't touched it since her message. "Everything okay?" The digital equivalent of tossing a glance over your shoulder. No call, no voice, just a vague pulse of obligation. But now it buzzed again. Another message. "Are you still in town?" I stared at the screen. Was I? Technically, yes. But in town implies proximity, a potential visit, a bridge that still connects. I didn't feel connected. I felt like a woman on the other side of something deep and wide, and suddenly I didn't want to swim back. I turned the phone off again. Later that afternoon, I returned to the volunteer center. The woman with the lemon scarf, her name was Denise, waved me in. "Got something," she said. "If you're free." "I am," I said. She led me to a warm room that smelled faintly of books and floor wax. Inside were 3 folding chairs, a low shelf of picture books, and a sign taped to the wall. "Read Aloud Hour. Ages 4 to 7. "You'll have 2 kids today," she said. "Brothers. Their grandmother usually comes, but she's sick." I sat down and chose a book at random. A battered copy of Frog and Toad Are Friends. The door opened. 2 boys came in, eyes wide and jackets crooked. One had a bandage on his chin. They sat without a word. I opened the book and began to read. Something shifted. Their heads tilted toward me, their little bodies stilled. The rhythm of the words filled the room, gentle and round. Frog said, "Toad, you are my best friend." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept reading. After the story, the younger one, maybe 5, looked up and said, "You read like my grandma." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said. He nodded seriously. "She's the best." I smiled. For that hour, I didn't feel left behind. I didn't feel forgotten. I just felt useful, present, alive. When I got back to the hotel, there were no new messages. The silence didn't sting this time. It felt like space I could stretch into. I ran a bath, hot, with a little packet of hotel soap, and lay there until the water cooled. She hadn't come. She hadn't called. And the baby, well, maybe one day I'd meet him, but I no longer needed it to feel like a mother. I'd remembered how to feel like myself. By the fourth night, the room no longer felt temporary. I'd placed my brush on the dresser, laid my scarf over the back of the chair, folded my nightgown neatly at the foot of the bed. Small things, quiet rituals, but they grounded me more than I realized. I hadn't lived anywhere but my own house in over 40 years, and yet this little room, with its chipped lamp and humming radiator, had begun to feel like shelter. That evening, I visited the diner 2 blocks down. The waitress recognized me from the first day. "You're the tea lady," she said, smiling. "I suppose I am," I replied. She brought me a booth near the window and poured my usual without asking. A quiet gift, the kind that doesn't demand a thank you but earns one anyway. I ordered soup and toast. Nothing extravagant, just warm food served by someone who didn't see me as a burden. While I waited, I pulled out my notebook. Not the one with the unsent letter. I'd left that in the drawer, but a fresh one, smaller, easier to carry. I began jotting ideas. Volunteer Tuesday, reading again, ask bakery if they need help on weekends, find out about senior co-op housing, maybe near library, call that lawyer in town, just to ask. The list was practical, but it meant something bigger. It meant I wasn't circling her anymore. I was building something without her at the center. Halfway through my soup, the door jingled. A young couple walked in, a man with a baby in one of those chest carriers, a woman with tired eyes, and a coat she hadn't zipped. They slid into the booth across from mine. The baby was asleep, his head turned sideways like a little moon. I didn't stare. I didn't ache. I just watched them the way you watch a passing train, from the platform, not from the tracks. The woman tried to smile but failed. The man looked at the menu like it was in another language. At one point, she reached across the table, rested her fingers on his, and said, "We'll get better at this." His eyes softened. He nodded. That was it. No grand gestures, no declarations. Just a small vow between 2 tired people trying. I turned back to my toast, took a sip of tea. Outside, it had started snowing. Just lightly, but enough to dust the sidewalk. I watched it fall under the street lamp, thin and scattered. It didn't settle, not yet, but it promised it would. When I returned to the hotel, the clerk gave me a hesitant look. "There was a call," he said, "from a woman. Said she was trying to find her mother. Didn't leave a name." I raised an eyebrow. "And you told her?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just that no one by that name was registered here?" "Good," I said. "That's the truth." He didn't press. I went upstairs and closed the door softly behind me. Let her call. Let her wonder. I'd given her a lifetime of answers. Now I was learning to live with questions and not rush to fill the silence. I stayed another day, not because I was waiting. That part of me had gone quiet. I stayed because it felt good to wake up without obligation. No to-do lists written by someone else. No errands disguised as gratitude. No performances of motherly enthusiasm when all I really wanted was for someone to ask, "And how are you, really?" After breakfast, I walked to the bakery again. This time, not for a roll or coffee, but with a question. "Do you ever need help?" I asked the girl behind the counter. She blinked. "Help?" "Yes," I said. "Not a job, just a pair of hands. I used to bake, back when mixers were made of steel and weighed more than your kitchen table." She laughed. We're always behind on frosting and labeling. I didn't expect a yes, but she gave it. By 11, I was in the back room, an apron tied awkwardly around my waist, smoothing icing onto lemon bars with a butter knife. My hands were slower than they used to be, but steady. And for the first time in a long while, I was doing something that would be eaten by strangers and appreciated in silence. There's a kind of love in that. In the corner of the prep room sat a radio playing quietly. Nothing modern. The kind of station where the announcers still pronounce afternoon like a full word. Between songs, the news played. I almost didn't hear it. But then the name floated through. Local family files civil complaint after elderly woman allegedly withdraws financial support without notice. I stopped. Held still. A matter involving informal arrangements between parent and adult child. No names were given, no city stated. But the implication was clear. And I smiled. Not because I wanted a fight. I didn't. But because a complaint means someone finally noticed I'd stopped giving. Up until now, my silence had been taken for weakness, for guilt, for submission. But now it had weight. That afternoon, back at the hotel, I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. An attorney Harold and I once used to set up our wills. He was long retired, but the office had passed to a woman named Deirdre. Her voice was sharp, efficient, the kind I used to find intimidating. Now it sounded like someone with a flashlight. I'd like to revisit a few documents, I told her. Make sure they reflect my current reality. Of course, she said. Do you have access to your old copies? I do, I said. And I'm no longer interested in doing what's expected, only what's right. She didn't pause. Then let's start there. We scheduled a meeting for Thursday. She asked if I needed transportation. I told her no. I had legs and a bakery down the street that now offered me coffee for free. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt balanced. She still hadn't called, not since that message. Are you still in town? No follow-up, no apology, no explanation, not even curiosity dressed as concern. I imagined her holding her phone, hesitating, maybe typing, maybe deleting. Maybe justifying everything to herself. She could have told us she was coming. She should have waited longer. She always makes it about her. But I hadn't made anything this time. Not the plan. Not the problem. Not the silence. This was her silence now, and I'd finally stopped filling it. That night, I sat in bed with the lamp on, the radio murmuring some jazz piece I couldn't name. I sipped tea and thought about how many years I'd spent being reachable, being on call, being the soft place to land. Now I was something else. Still soft, but not available. Still kind, but not convenient. Still loving, but no longer standing at the curb with a bag of gifts and a heart wide open. And still very much here. The next morning, the desk clerk stopped me on my way out. She came, he said. Yesterday evening. I looked at him, unblinking. She asked if you were still here. Said she wanted to talk. I told her I couldn't give out room numbers, and she got tense. What did she say? She asked about the bag. I told her it had been picked up. For donation. He hesitated. I think she expected you'd be waiting. That made me smile. Not cruelly, but with the kind of smile that comes from seeing clearly. Of course she did. She thought I'd still be sitting in that room, suitcase neatly zipped, waiting for her to decide what I was worth. Not anymore. I stepped outside. The cold was sharper than the day before, but it felt clean, honest. I walked to the bakery, tied on the apron without being asked, and spent the next hour slicing banana bread and helping a teenage girl tape labels onto cookie boxes. "You're really good at this," she said. "I've had a lot of practice," I said. She grinned. "Were you a baker?" I thought about all the birthdays, the cupcakes for class parties, the pies I made for my daughter's teachers, even when she forgot to tell me until the night before. "No," I said. "Just a mother." The girl shrugged like that was the same thing. At noon, I left early, my hands sticky with icing and sugar. I stopped by the corner thrift store and bought a warm hat, deep red, hand-knit. Not something I would have chosen a year ago, but now it felt right. Back at the hotel, the clerk handed me a note. She came by again, left this. It was a folded paper with my name in handwriting that looked rushed, uncertain. I opened it in my room. "Can we talk? I don't know what happened." That was it. No greeting, no mom, just that. I sat for a long time, holding the paper like it might change weight in my hands. What happened? I could have written a book. But what she meant, of course, was, why did you finally stop playing your part? Because for her, nothing had changed. She'd always lived in a world where I showed up, filled in, patched the cracks, never asked for thanks, and never stayed angry long enough to matter. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted a reset. And I had no interest in pressing that button. I didn't write back. Instead, I walked 3 blocks in the other direction and found the library. It was warm inside, filled with quiet movement. People flipping pages, kids whispering, a man snoring softly over a newspaper. I stood in the fiction aisle, fingers grazing titles like spines of old friends. A librarian asked if I needed help. I said no, but I stayed for hours, reading, resting, remembering. By the time I walked back to the hotel, the sky was pink with early winter dusk. I passed the bench by the bus stop where I'd once waited for a ride that never came. It looked smaller now. Back in my room, I lit the small bedside lamp and sat with my tea. The note sat folded on the table beside me. I didn't tear it up. I didn't burn it. I just let it sit there, harmless. She had finally come. But she hadn't come for me. She came for her version of me, the one who would nod, absorb, explain it all away. That woman was gone now, and the one sitting here, she was still just beginning. The next morning, I moved the note to the drawer, not out of sentiment, just to get it off the table. Let her message sit in the dark for a while. I'd sat in enough of it myself. At the bakery, they gave me a whole tray to frost. I stood at the back table, sleeves rolled up, hands steady, mind quiet. The rhythm of it, spreading, smoothing, setting aside, did something good to my nerves. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was disappearing into someone else's needs. By noon, Denise from the volunteer center called. "We've got a placement if you're still interested," she said. I am. It's a literacy program. Adults, mostly women. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Some of them are new to the country. Some just never got the time to learn. You'd be reading with them, talking, helping them feel less invisible. I said yes before she finished. Then she added, "They're housed through a transitional shelter. You'll need a background check, but that won't take long. The director's name is Evelyn." She's sharp, but kind. I hung up and sat with that word. Transitional. That's what this was, I suppose. A transition, not a breakdown, not a crisis. Just a movement from one life to another, like a woman turning a page. That afternoon, I walked further than usual. My knees ached, but I didn't rush. I passed a bus stop where a man was telling a story to no one in particular. Past a daycare where kids were shrieking in the kind of joy adults forget how to make. Past a park where 3 older women were playing cards on a picnic table with paper cups of coffee and not a care in the world. And I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I wasn't going back. Not to the house I once filled with casseroles and silence. Not to the role of invisible helper. Not to the lonely waiting room that so many older women sit in, hoping someone will remember who they used to be. This was my new life now. A small room in a quiet hotel. Warm coffee from people who knew my name. Work that didn't pretend to be love. And love, maybe not yet, but someday, that didn't look like work. Back at the hotel, the desk clerk greeted me with a hesitant nod. "No visits today," he said, almost apologetically. "Good," I said, and meant it. I stopped at the front desk mailbox, asked if I could write a note to someone. "Of course," he said. I pulled a small card from my purse, the kind you find in the back of drawers, the kind with a floral print and nothing inside. I wrote in careful, centered letters. "Please forward all mail to the Volunteer Resource Center, care of Ann Merritt. Thank you." He took it without comment. I went upstairs, packed my things. Not like I was leaving, but like I was relocating. Neatly. Deliberately. Tomorrow, I'd move into a shared housing program connected to the center. Nothing fancy, just a room with a lock, a bookshelf, and a shared kitchen where people cooked real food and washed their own dishes. It wasn't a demotion. It was a return to dignity. That night, I sat one last time in the chair by the hotel window. Outside, a couple argued near the parking lot. A dog barked. A teenage boy laughed too loudly into his phone. All of it sounded like life. Unfiltered, uncurated, alive. I made tea. I left the hotel robe folded on the bed, and before I turned off the lamp, I wrote one last line in my notebook. I am not a footnote. I am the sentence. The shared housing wasn't glamorous. No polished floors, no mini fridge stocked with hotel creamers. But it was warm, and it was quiet, and the door locked with a real key instead of a plastic card. My room had a twin bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto the alley. On the wall above the desk, someone had tacked up a thumb-worn map of the city. There were faint pencil marks on it, little X's, small stars, someone else's quiet attempts to understand where they'd been. I liked that. The first night, I unpacked slowly, not from exhaustion, but from a desire to make each item matter. I lined up my toothbrush, folded my nightgown into the drawer, placed the red knit hat on the hook by the door. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Evelyn, the shelter director, met me the next morning. She was sharp-eyed, compact, moved like someone who didn't have time for nonsense. But when I said, "I don't want to be in the way," she stopped in her tracks. "You're not. You're needed," she said, and nothing more. Sometimes that's all a woman needs to hear. The women in the reading program were shy at first. Some wore scarves, some wore tiredness, some spoke in half whispers, their eyes darting to see who was watching. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself for years in different forms. The glance you give before asking for something small, fearing it's too much. I was paired with a woman named Alma. She was maybe 50, maybe 70. Her smile was reluctant, but real. She held the book with both hands like it might try to slip away. We started with short words, quiet ones. Hope, dust, fold, stay. When she stumbled, I didn't correct her. I repeated the word softly, and she followed. It wasn't about perfection. It was about being allowed to try. Halfway through the session, she paused and said, "You don't talk too much." "Neither do you," I said. She smiled. That afternoon, after the reading, I walked past a notice board near the kitchen. There were flyers for bus routes, meal times, group meetings. One corner held small handwritten notes. Free shoes, size 8. Looking for job cleaning mornings. Anyone want to trade books? And one that stopped me. Childcare needed, Tuesdays and Fridays, near Greenridge. Just a few hours. No drama. Just kindness. I didn't take the number. Not yet. But I copied it into my notebook. That evening, as I sat on my new bed sipping tea, the phone buzzed again. The same number. My daughter. No message this time. Just the missed call icon. I didn't call back. I let the silence stand. Let her wonder where I'd gone. Let her feel, even for a moment, what it meant to reach out and not be answered. That wasn't cruelty. That was education. Because for years, she'd rung that bell and I'd come running. Now I was busy. Reading with Alma. Frosting cookies. Learning what I wanted at 72. I didn't need her voice in my ear to remember I was loved. I was finally learning to be loved. Not for what I gave, but for who I was when I gave nothing. The childcare listing stayed in my notebook for 3 days before I called. The woman who answered had a voice like gravel and black coffee. "Yes," she said, like she'd already asked it once. "I'm calling about the note," I said. "Childcare. Tuesdays and Fridays. I'm free both." Silence. Then, "How old are you?" 72. She snorted. "Good. I don't trust teenagers with babies. They've got too much going on in their heads." That made me smile. "I've got just enough." She gave me an address. "Come Friday, 10 sharp. If you're late, don't come back." She hung up without asking my name. That Friday, I arrived at a small apartment complex just past Greenridge. Red brick, peeling railings, a stroller by every other door. Her name was Joy, which did not match her face. She opened the door with a baby on her hip and 2 more children peeking out from behind her legs. "Got your ID?" she asked. I handed it over. She barely looked. "This is Micah," she said, nodding to the baby. "The other 2 go to preschool, but Friday's a no-school day." "You okay with 3? I looked at them. Sticky cheeks, wide eyes, shoes on the wrong feet. "Yes," I said. She stepped aside. "They've had their shots. I've got a camera in the kitchen. Don't lie to them, don't yell, and don't fall asleep." Then she was gone. The door closed. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Then the middle one, a girl with a tangled ponytail and socks that didn't match, held up a plastic dinosaur and said, "This one farts when you squeeze it." That was how the morning began. We played with plastic animals and cereal boxes, made towers from spoons and a roll of tape. I read a picture book about a bear who couldn't sleep. Micah drooled on my sweater, and I didn't flinch. At one point, the oldest boy, 5, maybe 6, sat beside me while the other 2 napped and asked, "Are you anyone's grandma?" The question hit me square in the chest. I didn't answer for a second. Then I said, "Not right now." He nodded, like that made perfect sense. At noon, Joy came back, tossed me a 20 without ceremony and said, "Next Friday?" I said yes. Not for the 20, not even for the children, but because I liked how I felt walking away from that door, useful, tired, real. At the house, Evelyn greeted me with a paper in hand. "We got a donation," she said. "In your name." I blinked. "Mine?" "Yes, a sizable one. No name on the check, just your initials and a note. Pay it forward, for the women who sit too quietly. I didn't need a signature to know where it came from. She had found a way to say something, finally, not through words but money, her usual language. I didn't feel moved. I felt confirmed. Because that money didn't buy back the years. It didn't wash away the waiting. But maybe, just maybe, it meant she'd started to see the shape of what I'd carried. Later that night, I sat in the shared kitchen with two other women. One peeled carrots. One played cards. I drank tea and listened to the soft rhythm of voices that didn't need to perform. "Where'd you come from?" one of them asked. "Nowhere," I said, then corrected myself. "Everywhere. Depends which day you're asking about." She nodded. "That's fair." We didn't speak of families, not directly. In places like these, women rarely offer that first. We speak of recipes, of the bus schedule, of cheap fabric softeners. Then, slowly, and only sometimes, we name the people who left us out. But that night, I didn't need to explain anything. I belonged. Not because I was someone's mother or helper or emergency contact, but because I was here. In my own name, Anne Merritt, age 72. No longer available for erasure. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded into a pale blue envelope. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting before I opened it. Those tight, slanted letters. The ones I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists left on my counter years ago. She always wrote like she didn't want anyone reading over her shoulder. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed it on the shelf beside my tea tin, right between a box of oatmeal and a jar of marmalade someone had donated. I stared at it while the kettle boiled, while I stirred sugar into my cup, while the other women came and went around the kitchen table. Only when the room quieted and I was alone did I sit and slide my finger beneath the flap. No greeting, no mom, just a flat beginning. "I don't know why you left like that. You didn't say anything. You just disappeared. I had a baby. I was tired. You should have understood." I read each sentence slowly, letting the weight of them land where it would. "You always make everything about your feelings, about how hurt you are. I asked you to come help and then you vanish." Who does that? Who just leaves without saying anything? I stopped there, set the letter down, took a sip of tea, then picked it up again. "I came by the hotel, twice. You didn't answer. I even asked the clerk. He was rude. You didn't even tell me you were okay? How do you think that felt?" The rest was more of the same. Confusion dressed as blame. Sadness camouflaged as accusation. And one final line: "I guess you were never really that interested in being a grandmother." That part made me laugh, not loudly, not cruelly, but with the kind of tired amusement only an older woman can manage. The kind of laugh that says, "You have no idea what I've done in silence." I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. I simply placed it under the leg of the wobbly table in my room. A letter like that doesn't need to be answered. It already answers itself. Later that day, I read with Alma again. She was wearing a blouse with small embroidered flowers and had her hair pinned up in a neat twist. She looked like someone who had started to believe she deserved to be seen. We read a story about a woman who loses her voice and finds it again in the most unexpected place, in a stranger's song, carried through the wall. Alma stopped halfway and said, "You ever feel like you've been silent so long, your words forget how to stand up straight?" I nodded. All the time. That evening, I walked to the diner for a quiet dinner. The waitress brought my tea without asking. In the booth across from me sat a young woman bouncing a baby on her lap while trying to eat spaghetti with one hand. I watched her for a moment, then caught her eye. She smiled, tired and grateful. I smiled back. She didn't remind me of my daughter. Not her face, not her voice, not the baby's shoes. But she reminded me of the woman I used to be, stretched thin, saying yes to everything, waiting for someone to offer help without making it feel like a favor. When I finished my tea, I stood and walked over. "Would you like me to hold him while you eat?" I asked gently. Her eyes welled up, then cleared. "Yes, please, just for a minute." The baby smelled of soap and milk. He curled into my shoulder without hesitation, soft and warm and trusting. That minute turned into 15, and when she was done, she said, "Thank you." That was all. No assumptions, no stories. Just one woman thanking another. And it was more than enough. It was a Thursday when I received a call from someone I hadn't thought of in years. "Anne, this is Becca, from the school, 20 years ago. Remember?" Her voice was warmer than memory, richer somehow, like time had brewed it slowly. I remembered her immediately. Single mother, 3 boys, worked nights cleaning offices. I used to sit with her youngest after school while she worked. Not for pay. Just because I could. Because no one else had said yes. "You were the only person who helped me back then," she said. "You sat with them when they were sick. You brought soup when I couldn't afford groceries. You even brought me boots that winter I couldn't feel my toes." I remembered all of it, but I'd stored it somewhere deep, like a folded quilt. Soft, necessary, mostly forgotten. "I heard you were here now," she said. "Volunteering, living at the shelter housing. I run the childcare program down the road. We need someone like you. Not just someone to watch kids, but someone who sees them." She didn't offer platitudes. She offered work. A room, too. A private one, small, but mine, with a view of the trees and a key that didn't have to be turned in at the end of the week. "I can't pay much," she added. "You don't have to," I said. We met the next day. She looked older, of course, gray at her temples, lines that hadn't been there before. But her eyes, the way she looked at me, they hadn't changed. She still looked like someone grateful in the bone. We hugged, and it didn't feel like sentiment. It felt like something returning to its right place. That weekend, I moved again. My last move, I told myself. The room was sunlit in the mornings, quiet at night. It smelled of fresh paint and distant lavender. I unpacked slowly again, hung a calendar, taped a photo of the bakery girls. One of them had printed it out for me. In the picture, I was mid-laugh, a smear of frosting on my sleeve. I hadn't looked that alive in years. Tuesday morning, I started work. 3 children, all under 5. One with night terrors. One with a speech delay. One who bit when scared. I didn't flinch. I'd seen worse. I'd carried worse. At snack time, the biter held my hand. "You smell like cookies," he said. "That's because I've made a few," I replied. They didn't know my story. They didn't ask. They just wanted someone who didn't vanish when things got loud. That night, I received a voicemail. From her. Not angry, not defensive, just confused, wounded maybe. "I don't know where you are or what you're doing, but I keep thinking about the bag, the one you left. You always bring too many gifts. You always overdo it. I never said thank you, and now you're gone." A pause. "I miss you. I don't know how to say it right, but I do. I'm sorry, I think, for not trying harder. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't healing. It was a first scratch at the surface of something too deep to fix in one voicemail. And that was fine. I didn't need her to catch up. I didn't need her to rewrite the past. I was already living forward. That night, I wrote a note to myself and pinned it above my desk. You were not too much. You were just too generous with people who gave too little. I read it every morning after that. There's a rhythm now. Tuesdays and Fridays with the children. Thursdays with Alma and the reading group. Afternoons at the bakery when they're behind. And in between, walks. Tea. A slow sort of stitching back into the fabric of a life I never knew I was allowed to have. No one asks about my past here. Not directly. Not cruelly. They just make space beside them, and I fill it. Quietly. Fully. Once a week, I pass by the park with the card players. One of them waved me over last time. Asked if I played rummy. I don't. Or maybe I did, years ago. But I sat down anyway. They didn't care about my story. Just whether I could keep track of the rules. I lost. Twice. Still, they made space again the next week. The voicemail hasn't come again. No follow-up, no flowers, no visit. Sometimes I think about the baby, what he looks like now, if he's crawling, if he's begun to babble, reaching toward words that sound like names, if he asks for me with a noise no one yet recognizes. But I don't reach for that thought anymore. I let it pass, like a bird that doesn't need to land. One evening, I walked past a little community board where someone had tacked up a flyer. Women's Circle, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. No talking about men, just tea and truth. I laughed when I read it, and I went. There were 7 of us that first night, all ages, all reasons for showing up. We didn't introduce ourselves with stories, just first names and what kind of day we'd had. When it was my turn, I said, I had a quiet day, and I liked it. One of them raised her mug. To quiet days. That became our thing. Each week we toasted something small, a good peach, a child's drawing, a letter torn up before it was sent. I've stopped asking whether she'll write again, because the answer is maybe. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. Maybe she'll grow into a woman who sees what she couldn't before. Or maybe she'll keep telling herself I left because I was unreasonable, unkind, ungrateful. But none of that touches me anymore. Because I know who I am now. Not someone who waits with gifts in a suitcase, standing at an airport curb. Not someone who reads silence as love. Not someone whose value is tied to her usefulness. I am Anne Merritt. I read to women learning to trust their own voices. I care for children who bite when frightened. I frost cookies with girls who don't yet know how rare gentleness is. I sit in circles where no one asks for my history to justify my presence. And I am whole. Not because someone finally came for me, but because I finally stopped leaving myself behind. If this story sat with you, if you saw yourself in any of its shadows, then let me say it clearly. It is not too late. You are not too much. And you are allowed to begin again. Even now. Especially now.